Welcome to the Debatable Podcast. You finally hit it. I mean, you secured that magical 20 lakh a year salary package, the one you always pictured as the ultimate ticket to the good life.
Right, the classic milestone.
Exactly, the milestone that was supposed to mean you've officially made it. But instead of feeling rich or, even just comfortable, you are tracking every single rupee on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, checking the banking app every day.
Oh, constantly. You're stressed about your annual rent hike, and you're staring at your bank account on the 28th of the month, wondering where on earth the money actually went.
It's just gone.
Right. So why does achieving this traditional middle-class dream suddenly feel less like a victory lap and, more like trying to sprint up a down escalator?
I mean, it is arguably the defining economic paradox of our time. You follow the established script, right? You get the competitive degree, you land the corporate job, you work late, you climb the ladder.
You do everything you were told to do.
Exactly. And yet the mathematical reality of your daily life feels increasingly fragile. You aren't doing anything wrong, but the financial ground is just shifting underneath you.
It really is. So today, we are unpacking the structural, economic, and honestly, the psychological forces that are actively squeezing the Indian salaried class.
And we have a lot to get through.
We really do. We are taking a massive stack of fresh data to map exactly what is happening to your wallet. We're talking insights from Saurabh Mukherjee's new book, Breakpoint, the latest household consumption expenditure survey, detailed analysis of Budget 2026, and some real-time real estate data.
It's all connected, too.
Yeah, it is. Okay, let's unpack this because we have to start by entirely dismantling the illusion of the high salary. We're operating on a totally outdated definition of wealth here.
We really are. I mean, the entire concept of what constitutes a good salary hasn't been properly adjusted for the realities of modern urban living in, almost a decade. Seriously. You hear a number like 20 lakhs, and your brain just anchors that figure to what it meant back in 2014, not what it actually commands today.
Right. And I was looking at a breakdown from CA Nitin Kaushik, and it completely shatters this illusion of the 20 lakh cost to company, or CPC.
Oh, yeah. CTC is such a trap.
It is. When you hear 20 lakhs, It sounds like absolute financial freedom. But Kaushik breaks down the actual math step by step, and it is a brutal reality check.
Run us through it.
Okay, so first, strip away the taxes and your Provident Fund contributions. Your actual in-hand salary, the liquid cash that hits your savings account, that shrinks to about 1.25 lakh rupees per month.
Right, which, I mean, that figure still sounds perfectly comfortable in isolation.
Sure, in isolation. But you don't live in isolation. You live in a major metropolitan city because that is literally the only place where the jobs paying 20 lakhs actually exist.
Yeah, you can't really work from a village and make that kind of corporate money. Exactly. The geography of your income is inextricably linked to the geography of your expenses. You just cannot earn a Bengaluru or Mumbai salary while paying Tier 3 city living costs.
So true. Let's actually do the math on those metro expenses for you, the listener, who is just trying to survive out there.
Let's do it.
Okay, so you need a decent 1 or 2 bedroom apartment near your office, right? Because a 3-hour commute will just destroy your mental health.
Oh, completely. It's not sustainable.
Right. So that's easily 40,000 rupees a month in rent right off the top. So your 1.25 lakh is immediately down to 85,000.
Just like that.
Yeah. Then you've got the car EMI because public transport isn't always reliable or safe for late night corporate hours.
Yeah.
So you have a modest vehicle. That sets you back another 25,000 rupees.
And we are now down to 60,000.
Down to 60,000. Then there's monthly household basics. Your groceries, electricity, water, cooking gas, fuel for the car, maybe the occasional dinner out. There goes another 30,000 rupees.
So we are down to 30,000 rupees.
Yep. Which brings us to, the invisible costs of modern life.
The digital tax.
Yes. The expenses that didn't even exist a generation ago, but are literally mandatory for participation in society today.
I mean, your mobile data plan, high-speed home internet so you can work remotely, OTT subscriptions because you don't have cable anymore.
And maybe the EMI on that laptop or smartphone you need to function in a corporate environment.
Right. Kaushik estimates that's at least another 5,000 rupees.
Down to 25,000.
Yeah, and then add in a tiny conservative buffer for unplanned expenses. A sudden medical consultation, a friend's wedding gift, a flight back home for Diwali.
That's easily another 5,000. So what are you left with at the very end of the month?
Barely 15,000 to 20,000 rupees.
It's crazy. And that remaining fraction is supposed to carry the weight of your entire future.
It really is. That 15,000 rupees has to fund your emergency savings, your retirement investments, your children's future education, and, I don't know, any personal aspirations you might actually have.
When you view it through that mechanical lens, earning 20 lakhs in an Indian metro isn't a ticket to wealth at all.
Not even close. It is barely a ticket to baseline stability. I mean, it requires constant, exhausting financial vigilance just to avoid slipping backward.
But, the natural assumption is that corporate salaries are aggressively rising to meet these costs, right?
Yeah.
We see the headlines about corporate India booming.
Stock market hitting all-time highs.
Exactly. The intuitive leap is that if you're working in the top tier of the corporate world, your income is naturally outpacing your living costs.
Well, this is where we run into one of the most sobering, paradigm-shifting data points from Saurabh Mukherjee's new book, Breakpoint.
Oh, this data blew my mind.
Right. He didn't just look at anecdotes. He looked at the hard accounting data of the Nifty 50 companies.
So these are the 50 largest, most dominant, most profitable listed firms in the country, the absolute pinnacle of the organized corporate sector.
Precisely. And he analyzed their aggregate employee salary costs from the financial year 2016 all the way through to 2025.
That is almost a decade of data across the most successful companies in the country.
And over those 9 years, the average salary cost per employee at these elite firms grew at a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of just 1%.
Wait, I have to pause you there because 1% sounds mathematically impossible.
It sounds absurd, I know.
Yeah, because we hear about 8%, 10%, even 15% appraisal hikes in the corporate sector all the time. People jump ships for 30% hikes. How can the aggregate growth be only 1%?
Okay, so those headline appraisal numbers are real for specific individuals, absolutely. But they obscure the aggregate structural reality.
What do you mean?
Well, when you look at the total employee base, a few things are happening simultaneously. First, there's the constant influx of new hires coming in at the bottom, bands at totally stagnant starting salaries.
Oh, right. A fresh graduate today often starts at the exact same package a fresh graduate did back in 2014.
Exactly. Nothing has changed at the bottom. Second, there is a massive flattening of middle management compensation. The days of guarantee, inflation-beating promotions for simply putting in the years, those are over.
So you blend the high performers hikes with the wage stagnation at the bottom and the middle.
And the average cost per employee barely moves. It averages out to 1%.
Wow.
Now contrast that 1% nominal growth with the government-reported inflation rate over that exact same 9-year period, which hovered steadily around 5%.
Okay, so if my salary only grows by 1%, but the fundamental cost of the things I need to survive grows by 5%, the math is terrifying.
It introduces the concept of real wages. This is a crucial economic principle. Real wages are your nominal income strictly adjusted for inflation.
It strips away the illusion of the big number on your paycheck.
Right. It measures the actual purchasing power of that money. If overall inflation is 5% and your salary growth is 1%, your real wage growth is -4%.
-4%.
This implies that the literal purchasing power of top-tier corporate employees effectively shrank by roughly 4% every single year for nearly a decade.
That is wild. I like to think of the economy like a treadmill.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, so the display on the machine is your nominal salary. It says you're running forward, you're putting in the miles, and your legs are certainly tired.
You feel like you're working hard.
Exactly. But someone secretly cranked up the incline and the belt speed, and that's inflation. So even though the display says you are advancing, you are actually losing ground.
Sliding backward toward the edge of the machine.
Right, while running as fast as humanly possible.
That visual captures the exhaustion perfectly. You are expending maximum effort just to avoid falling off. And the friction on that treadmill is increasing because of macroeconomic tax shifts, too.
Yes, over the past decade, we have witnessed a distinct structural shift in exactly who is funding the machinery of the government.
This is the tax burden shift, and it's something you feel acutely every time you look at the tax deducted at source on your payslip.
That gut punch feeling that you're carrying a disproportionate share of the nation's financial weight.
Well, the data totally validates that feeling. If we look at the gross tax revenues, corporate tax collections actually fell to 3.0% of the GDP. Simultaneously, individual income tax collections consistently rose, eventually hitting 3.6% of the GDP.
Wait, why did that happen? Why did the corporate share shrink while the individual share grew?
The government's underlying logic was to spur economic growth. They significantly cut corporate tax rates a few years ago.
Oh, right. I remember that.
Yeah, the economic theory was that if corporations kept more of their profits, they would reinvest that capital into building new factories, expanding operations, and creating millions of new jobs.
A classic supply-side stimulation attempt.
Exactly. But on the flip side, the government has been incredibly aggressive and efficient at widening the individual tax base.
Through digital tracking.
Right. Linking PAN with Aadhaar, tracking high-value transactions, they are catching more salaried individuals in the tax net than ever before.
So the corporate sector was essentially given a lighter load so they could theoretically run faster and pull the economy forward.
But the salaried individual ended up carrying the difference.
Yeah. So I ask you, listening to this right now, think about your own salary increments over the last few years. Have they genuinely outpaced the reality of your grocery bills, your rent hikes, your child's school fees?
Probably not.
Or do you feel like you are earning a higher number, but objectively affording less?
And that question logically forces us to look at the expenditure side of the equation. If real wages are functionally shrinking, what specific black holes are devouring all that money?
This is where I find the data really fascinating, because the official inflation rate that we hear debated on the news all the time, that 5% figure, doesn't actually reflect the reality of what a middle-class family buys.
Not at all. The government measures inflation using a specific basket of goods.
Right, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI.
Yes. The issue is that the weighting of the CPI basket assumes that roughly 50% of an average household's total spending goes toward food and basic sustenance.
Which might be true for some.
Right. That weighting might accurately reflect the reality for lower-income demographics or rural populations. But for an urban middle-class professional, the expenditure pie chart looks entirely different.
Oh, completely. Your dominant expenses are private education, private health care, personal transportation, and urban housing.
And when you isolate the inflation on those specific services, the picture is incredibly bleak.
It's scary.
Mukherjee's research calculates that the effective lived inflation for a middle-class household isn't 5%. It is closer to 9%.
9%. Let's look at the specific items there. The cost of a standard vegetarian thali is rising at about 11% annually.
Private medical costs, hospital beds, consultations, insurance premiums, those are surging at 14% a year.
14%. And education fees are consistently hiking well above baseline inflation, too.
Exactly. So if we take that 9% personal inflation rate, we can apply the rule of 72.
Oh, I love this rule. Explain how that works.
It's a simple mathematical formula used in finance to estimate how long it takes for a value to double. You just divide 72 by the annual growth rate.
Okay, so 72 divided by 9 equals exactly 8.
Yes. This means the true mathematical cost of maintaining your current exact standard of living doubles every 8 years.
This to stand completely still. Every 8 years, you need to earn twice as much money just to keep living in the same apartment, eating the same food, and sending your kid to the same school.
It's a massive burden.
And we have incredibly detailed academic research that proves households are just buckling under this math. The International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research, the IJFMR, recently published a comprehensive study on this.
Right. They compared household expenditure behavior from the pandemic year of 2020 against the latest available data from 2023-24.
And the findings document a massive structural reallocation of household budgets. People are moving money away from the future and towards simple present-day survival.
The numbers are stark. For urban households, the percentage of their income spent strictly on essentials, meaning food, housing, healthcare, and transport, jumped from 80% to 83.2%.
And for rural households, the jump was even steeper, climbing from 77% to 83.4%.
Think about that. More than 83 cents of every single rupee earned is immediately incinerated purely on baseline survival and maintenance.
It leaves nothing behind. If your basic survival is consuming a larger slice of the pie, something else has to be violently cut.
And the study showed a sharp corresponding decline in non-essential spending. Spending on recreation, clothing, and most alarmingly, education all contracted significantly.
I really love this data point because it completely destroys a very popular cultural myth.
The avocado toast argument.
Yes. The avocado toast myth. We always hear this narrative that the modern middle class is broke because they are frivolous. You know, they buy too many iPhones, they drink expensive lattes, they take Instagram vacations they can't afford.
But this study proves that narrative is largely false.
Totally false. They are actively, painfully cutting back on discretionary spending. The core basics of modern life are simply too expensive.
And you know, this behavior actually flies in the face of a foundational economic principle known as Engel's law. Formulated by the statistician Ernst Engel in the 19th century, this law states that as a household's income rises, the proportion of that income spent on food and basic daily essentials should naturally drop.
Let me break that down simply. There is a physical limit to how much you can eat or how many beds you can sleep in at one time.
Exactly.
If you make 50,000 rupees a month, you might spend 25,000 on food. But if you get a raise to 100,000 a month, you aren't going to start eating 50,000 rupees worth of food.
You still spend 25,000 on food.
Right, meaning the percentage drops. And that freed up capital goes toward wealth-building investments, leisure, or advanced education.
Precisely. A functioning economy relies on Engel's law. But what the IJFMR data reveals is that the Indian salaried class is currently experiencing Engel's law in reverse.
In reverse.
Yes. Despite nominal incomes creeping up, the proportion of income consumed by basic survival needs is actively expanding. This is a severe macroeconomic warning sign.
It indicates deep economic distress right beneath the surface of GDP growth.
Now, you mentioned that families are cutting back on education spending. That feels particularly dangerous because education is the entire foundation of middle-class mobility.
It's the only ladder up.
It is deeply alarming, and to understand the mechanism of why this is happening, we have to look at the permanent income hypothesis.
That's Milton Friedman.
Yes, developed by Milton Friedman alongside Keynesian consumption theories. The permanent income hypothesis essentially argues that people don't base their spending decisions purely on their current month's paycheck.
Okay.
They base their spending on a mental model of their expected long-term average income. They assume their career will progress, their salary will grow, and things will generally get better.
Oh, so that's why you take on a home loan at 28. Because you assume your income at 35 will easily cover the EMI.
Exactly. But what happens when the 1% real wage growth and 9% inflation shatters that mental model? People realize the future isn't going to bail them out. So they are forced to make agonizing defensive choices today. Keynesian theory tells us that when current disposable income is severely constrained, consumption drops. But we're seeing something worse. Families are actively deprioritizing long-term human capital.
Pulling the kids out of extra classes.
Yes. They are pulling back on advanced education or skill building for their children to ensure they can pay this month's rent. They are sacrificing tomorrow's potential to survive today's reality.
And the ultimate, immediate casualty of sacrificing tomorrow to pay for today is your household savings.
The national data on savings reflects this perfectly. Household savings, measured as a percentage of the national GDP, crashed from 22.7% in 2020 down to 18.1% in 2024.
That is a massive drop in just 4 years.
And the forward-looking projections for 2025 show it slipping even further, likely hitting around 17.5%.
So the financial buffer that traditionally protects Indian families from a medical disaster or a sudden job loss is thinning out at an unprecedented rate.
It's vanishing.
Now, a massive chunk of this essentials budget that is devouring our savings goes directly toward housing. We cannot talk about the middle-class squeeze without looking at the physical spaces where everyone is forced to live.
Because you have to move to the city to find these corporate jobs.
You have no choice. The
Yep.
cities are the undisputed economic engines of the nation. To put it in perspective, urban areas represent only about 3% of India's total landmass.
Just 3%.
Yet that tiny 3% contributes between 60% and 70% of the entire national GDP. It is an extreme concentration of economic activity.
It's wild. In fact, just 15 major cities account for roughly 30% of the country's entire economic output.
Which is what economists call the economies of agglomeration, right?
Yeah.
Businesses cluster together to share talent, infrastructure, and markets, which creates wealth.
Right, so you have to be in one of those 15 cities to participate in the modern economy. But the infrastructure of these cities is buckling under the weight of this forced migration.
Oh, big time.
The data shows a massive systemic infrastructure deficit. India requires an annual investment of approximately 4.6 lakh crore rupees just to keep urban infrastructure functioning at a baseline level.
We're talking roads, water, sewage, public transport.
Exactly. But currently, we are only spending about 1.3 lakh crore annually. That is a massive 70% shortfall every single year.
And the critical thing to understand is that when public infrastructure is underfunded by 70%, the costs don't just disappear.
No, they are simply transferred directly to the citizen. Because public systems fail, a massive private pollution economy has boomed.
The pollution economy, that is such a stark way to phrase it. It means you are privately subsidizing the failure of the public commons.
Precisely.
You buy an expensive air purifier for every bedroom because the public air quality is toxic and making your kids sick.
Well,
You install an expensive RO water purifier and pay for its annual maintenance because the municipal water supply isn't safe to drink.
you buy a private inverter because the power grid fails.
Right. These aren't luxury purchases. They are private taxes levied on you because the city's infrastructure is broken.
And then on top of all those private subsidies, there is the raw cost of the actual physical roof over your head.
The rent and the mortgages.
Let's look at a specific case study that exemplifies this crisis.
Hmm.
The Bengaluru real estate market. Bengaluru is the tech capital. It has historically been the poster child for middle-class aspiration and wealth creation.
Yeah, I was reviewing the real estate data from Anarock and Shriram Properties regarding what developers define as mid-segment housing. In the context of Bengaluru, this is categorized as homes priced between 40 lakh and 80 lakh rupees.
Okay.
Now, to be completely clear, 80 lakhs is an astronomical amount of money for someone taking home 1.25 lakhs a month.
It absolutely is. It requires stretching a dual-income household to the absolute maximum limit.
But in the context of the modern real estate market, that 40 to 80 lakh bracket is considered the entry-level fundamental middle-class dream.
Right.
But the data shows that this entire segment is literally disappearing from the map. Look at the sales trajectory over the last few years.
It's falling off a cliff.
In 2022, there were over 28,000 units sold in that specific 40 to 80 lakh range in Bengaluru. By 2023, that number fell to 19,400. In 2024, it dropped further to 15,400.
And in the first half of 2025,
They sold a mere 5,660 units.
that is a total collapse in sales volume.
Why is this happening, though? Are people suddenly deciding they just want to rent forever?
No, the desire for homeownership hasn't changed at all. They are being mathematically priced out of existence because of input costs.
Like raw materials.
Yeah, construction expenses across the entire country have surged by nearly 40% in just a few years. We're talking about global supply chain issues, inflation in the commodity cycles for steel and cement, and rising labor costs.
And developers operate on tight margins, so they immediately pass those raw material costs directly to the end buyer.
Exactly. Even a seemingly modest hike of 500 to 800 rupees per square foot adds 5 to 8 lakh rupees to the final sticker price of a standard apartment.
And for a highly price-sensitive middle-class buyer, that extra 5 lakh isn't an inconvenience. It is the absolute difference between getting the mortgage approved by the bank and being flatly rejected.
Exactly. And certain micromarkets are entirely decoupling from reality. The data notes that Bangalore, a prominent developing area in Bengaluru, saw an incomprehensible 75% jump in average residential prices between 2022 and early 2025.
75% in 3 years.
Devanahalli jumped 50%. Let's connect this back to our earlier point. How is a salary growing at a nominal 1% supposed to chase a house price growing at 75%?
It cannot. The math completely breaks, which forces us to look at the mechanism of the market from the other side, the developer's dilemma.
Right. Developers are not charities. They're highly leveraged businesses that need to protect their margins to survive.
With the cost of land acquisition soaring in urban centers and construction costs up 40%, it is simply no longer profitable for most private developers to build a 50 lakh rupee home.
The margins are too thin to justify the risk, so the entire industry pivots. They shift their capital and their focus entirely toward high-margin, premium luxury projects.
They stop building for the middle class because the middle class literally cannot afford to pay the prices the developer needs to charge to remain solvent.
That is the exact mechanism. And the data confirms this pivot. The share of new housing supply in the mid-segment fell from representing 81% of all new launches in 2022 down to just 35% by the end of 2024.
The affordable homes simply aren't being built anymore. The supply is vanishing.
But wait, if the homes cost 80 lakhs or more and your real wages are falling, some people are clearly still buying them. Who is buying these homes?
That's the million-dollar question. Madhusudhan Ji, the chairman and D of Sumatura Group, made a really chilling observation about the psychology driving the current market.
What did he say?
He said in real estate, FOMO is real, fear of missing out. Buyers see prices in areas like Bangalore rising 50% or 75%, and they panic.
Oh, they rush in.
They rush to purchase homes they know they can barely afford, stretching their debt-to-income ratios to the absolute breaking point, purely because they are terrified that if they don't buy today, they will be permanently locked out of the property market forever.
It is panic buying, driven entirely by scarcity and runaway asset inflation. They're locking themselves into 20-year financial straitjackets, committing huge portions of their future labor to a bank purely out of fear.
So if the cities are generating 70% of the wealth of the nation, but merely surviving in those cities drains all of your personal wealth through exorbitant rent, punishing EMIs, and private purifiers, aren't cities essentially becoming giant wealth extraction machines for the middle class?
That is a highly analytical way to look at modern urban economics, but it's accurate.
You migrate there to earn, but the geography of the city captures all the value of your labor.
The city captures the surplus value of your labor through its sheer cost of living, and this naturally introduces a massive gap. If your wages are functionally shrinking against inflation, your core essentials cost 9% more every year, your savings are actively dropping, and your housing costs are astronomical. How is anyone actually paying for anything?
Right. The math doesn't balance.
If the income doesn't cover the outflow, there is only one way to bridge that gap: debt.
Debt is the invisible scaffolding holding up the illusion of the middle-class lifestyle.
And the granular numbers on this debt are staggering. According to the data, India's non-housing household debt, measured as a percentage of income, now officially exceeds the level seen in both the United States and China.
Now, wait, I need to make sure I understand that. We're talking about non-housing debt. So this isn't people taking out a 30-year mortgage to buy an asset. This is unsecured, high-interest personal debt.
Exactly. This is credit cards, personal loans, consumer durable loans, buy now, pay later schemes. Nearly 50% of all Indian families currently hold some form of personal loan.
Half the country.
And the demographic profile of that borrowing is shifting younger and younger. A staggering 67% of borrowers took out their very first loan before they even reached the age of 30.
You are starting your adult professional life instantly in the red. You graduate, get a job, and immediately owe the bank money.
And the cost of servicing that debt is crushing. The data shows that for those carrying debt, nearly 40% of their annual income goes straight to servicing it.
40 cents of every single rupee you earn isn't yours.
Oh.
It belongs to the financial institution just to cover the interest payments and minimum balances.
What makes this macroeconomic trend particularly dangerous is the fundamental nature of the debt being acquired.
How so?
In a structurally healthy economy, households take on debt to acquire productive assets like a home that will appreciate or capital to start a small business that will generate future wealth.
Right.
But the data from Mukherjee's Breakpoint indicates that an alarming portion of this current borrowing is unproductive debt.
Unproductive debt means it's funding pure consumption. It's the credit card swipe for the family holiday in Bali because everyone else on Instagram went. It's the EMI on the new 1 lakh rupee smartphone.
But it's also much darker and more desperate than that.
Yeah, it is. It is personal loans taken out at 14% interest to pay for a child's school admission donations. It is debt taken on to cover a medical emergency because the corporate health insurance cover was exhausted after 2 days in the ICU.
It is high-interest debt taken on merely to survive the baseline, non-negotiable expectations of middle-class life.
And that desperation leads to a vicious cycle. Between 5% and 10% of retail borrowers are entirely caught in a debt trap.
Just moving it around.
Yeah, they are taking out new high-interest loans for the sole purpose of paying the EMIs on their older loans. They're just moving the debt around while it geometrically grows.
And when you aggregate this micro-level individual financial distress, you create a massive macro-level threat to the entire Indian economy.
Because if 40% of your income is legally committed to paying off old debt and 83% of your income is going to basic survival, you simply aren't buying new things.
Precisely. And this is where the broader economic engine begins to sputter. India's tremendous economic growth story following the liberalization in 1991 was built on a very specific virtuous cycle.
Let's map that out.
It works like this. Middle-class consumption creates massive demand for products and services. That demand forces companies to expand, build new factories, and create new jobs.
And those new jobs put salaries in the pockets of a new, expanding middle class.
Who then go out and consume even more. It is a continuous self-sustaining engine of growth.
But if the middle class is choked by stagnant wages, 9% personal inflation, and 40% debt servicing, the consumption engine physically stalls.
And we are absolutely seeing that stall right now in the macro data. Look at the fast-moving consumer goods sector, or FMCG.
So these are the daily basic soaps, shampoos, packaged foods, toothpaste.
Right. Volume growth in FMCG has slowed dramatically from a robust 11% back in the financial year 2011 down to an anemic 3% in FY25.
That's a huge drop.
Car sales are shrinking with inventory piling up at dealerships. The growth in consumer durable things like refrigerators and washing machines has collapsed from 11% down to barely 1 or 2%.
The consumption engine is breaking down because the consumer themselves is financially broken.
And this demand destruction feeds directly back into the job market. If companies aren't selling products, they don't have the revenue or the incentive to hire new workers.
It's a chain reaction.
Furthermore, we have to look at the supply side of capital. Banks are still deeply scarred by the Asset Quality Review of 2015.
Let's explain the asset quality review for those who might not follow banking policy closely. What was it, and why does it matter today?
Well, in 2015, the central bank essentially forced commercial banks to come clean and officially recognize billions of dollars in bad loans they had given out to large corporations, primarily in infrastructure and power, that were never going to be paid back.
So they had to clear the books.
It cleaned up the system, yes, but the trauma of having to write off all that corporate debt made banks highly risk-averse. Today, they are reluctant to finance new large-scale business projects.
So if banks refusing to lend to businesses and consumers refusing to buy products, private sector job creation is choked off at the source.
And then you add the massive technology shift on top of that stagnant job market.
Aye, aye.
The IT sector has effectively been the golden ticket to the middle class for 2 decades. It absorbed millions of engineering graduates. But the IT sector laid off over 100,000 professionals across 2024 and 2025.
Over 100,000.
The rapid deployment of artificial intelligence is beginning to permanently hollow out the exact kind of routine, entry-level cognitive work that sustained that massive hiring pipeline.
It is a perfect macroeconomic storm. Stagnant real wages, surging essential costs, an explosion of unproductive debt, and a contracting AI-threatened job market.
It is.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We ask you to pause and objectively look at your own credit card statements and loan portfolios. Are you borrowing capital to build assets that will appreciate, or are you just borrowing to maintain the increasingly fragile illusion of a lifestyle that your actual salary can no longer organically support?
Because the definition of that lifestyle is fundamentally changing before our eyes. We have spent a lot of time analyzing the hard data, the percentages, and the macroeconomics, but we need to translate these abstract numbers into the lived experience.
Oh, it actually feels.
Exactly. How does this immense, invisible economic pressure change the very fabric of our daily social lives? What does it actually mean to be middle class today compared to what it meant a decade ago?
This is where I want to bring up a fascinating viral post by Sanyam Sharma, an ex-Chrysler analyst. It resonated so deeply because it captured the cultural zeitgeist of this exact economic moment.
I remember reading that.
Yeah, he outlined 4 everyday comforts, 4 foundational pillars of the traditional Indian middle-class identity that are rapidly vanishing due to the exact financial math we just discussed. Vanishing comfort number 1, the shrinking family.
For generations, a hallmark of middle-class stability was having a large family. It was a sign of prosperity.
But Sharma points out that the second child is rapidly becoming mathematically unaffordable.
When you calculate the surging costs of private education, pediatric health care, and childcare in an urban center, couples are looking at their spreadsheets and realizing that having 2 children means severely compromising the financial security and opportunities of the entire household.
Which is pushing India's urban fertility rates down dramatically, altering the demographic future of the country.
It's no longer a choice based on personal preference or family values. It's a harsh choice forced by Excel formulas.
Which leads directly to vanishing comfort number 2, the decline of the single-income household.
Historically, a single robust corporate salary was sufficient to support a middle-class family, allowing one parent, very often the mother, the option to manage the household and children full-time if they chose to do so.
But that dynamic is no longer a lifestyle choice. It has been practically eradicated by the sheer cost of urban living.
Dual incomes are now an absolute non-negotiable economic necessity just to qualify for the metro housing EMIs and to keep up with that 9% personal inflation rate.
Both partners are now forced to run on the treadmill at maximum speed just to keep the household from sliding off the back.
Vanishing comfort number 3 is perhaps the most emotionally difficult because it strikes at the heart of Indian family structures: elderly care pressure.
This specific point highlights the breaking of an implicit intergenerational contract. In Indian society, the cultural expectation has always been that children will eventually become the financial safety net for their aging parents.
But Sharma warns that the current generation of earners, who are already crushed by their own housing debt and exorbitant childcare costs, simply do not possess the surplus capital required to fully financially support their parents' retirement and the rapidly rising costs of geriatric healthcare.
The sandwich generation.
Yeah.
You're squeezed mercilessly from the bottom by your kids' astronomical school fees and squeezed from the top by your parents' compounding hospital bills, all while your own real wages fall.
And vanishing comfort number 4, domestic help as a luxury.
Right. The urban Indian middle class has long relied on access to affordable domestic labor cooks, drivers. House helps to manage the intense logistical demands of dual-career households.
But the labor market is fundamentally shifting. Demand for these services is higher than ever, but supply is constrained, and wages for domestic workers are rightfully and naturally rising.
What was once considered a standard, expected utility of middle-class life is quickly transitioning into a premium luxury service that many can no longer justify.
You combine all these vanishing comforts, the necessity of dual incomes, the sudden lack of affordable domestic help, the guilt of the intergenerational financial squeeze, and you end up with a nationwide epidemic of workplace burnout.
People are working harder than ever under immense psychological pressure simply to tread water. It's gotten so severe that there was actually a Right to Disconnect Bill 2026 introduced recently in Parliament.
Yes, a private member's bill attempting to grant employees the legal right to ignore work-related calls and emails after official office hours.
Specifically designed to protect mental health and combat toxic corporate expectations.
Now, whether a bill like that actually passes or is enforceable is debatable, but the mere fact that it is being formally debated in Parliament highlights the extreme systemic psychological toll of the current work culture.
The financial education platform Zeroda Varsity published a great piece analyzing this psychological aspect. They pointed out that for most middle-class Indians, your chosen profession isn't just a way to generate income.
No, it is your entire identity.
It is your social standing in the community. It's your tangible proof to your family that the decades of intense education, the grueling exam prep, the coaching classes actually paid off.
But today, because of the relentless economic squeeze, the threat of AI automation, and the lack of wage growth, that professional identity is no longer a source of profound pride. It has mutated into a source of constant low-grade anxiety.
The implicit promise was always, study hard, get the degree, and you will be safe.
But today, even if you did everything perfectly right, even if you secured the prestigious degree, financial safety is absolutely not guaranteed.
The Coaching Institute Drishti IAS released a massive report on the youth employment crisis, and they didn't mince words with their terminology. They called it a looming demographic disaster.
Strong words.
Yeah. We currently possess the most highly educated, technically skilled youth population in our nation's history, and the formal economy simply isn't creating enough well-paying jobs to absorb them.
It creates an intense society-wide dissonance. The long-standing economic expectation of India's demographic dividend was that millions of young, educated workers would seamlessly enter the workforce, propel the national economy forward, and achieve individual prosperity.
Instead, what we have on the ground are millions of highly qualified individuals engaging in brutal competition over a shrinking pool of stagnant wage jobs.
It's like the fundamental rulebook for life was secretly rewritten while we were halfway through playing the game.
Exactly. The milestones our parents used to measure a successful life, having a large family, paying off a spacious house by the time you're 40, easily supporting the grandparents. They aren't just difficult now. They are mathematically out of reach for the vast majority of the current generation.
So true.
So with all these massive structural macroeconomic crises bearing down heavily on the salaried class, what is the government doing to help? Let's turn our attention to the policy void and analyze the latest budget 2026.
When you objectively analyze the text and allocations of the union budget for 2026-27, the overwhelming policy theme is one of continuity, fiscal consolidation, and stability, rather than providing direct, structural financial relief for the salaried middle class.
Let's translate that into plain English. No new income tax cuts.
Correct. The income tax slab rates remain entirely unchanged from the previous financial year.
Wow.
If you were anxiously waiting for the budget speech, hoping for a major reduction in your headline tax burden to help offset that 9% effective inflation rate we discussed, it is simply not present in this policy document.
So if there are no structural tax cuts, what is actually in the budget for the individual taxpayer?
The Finance Ministry's focus shifted entirely toward what the government categorizes as compliance relief.
What does that mean?
This means they are trying to make the administrative process of paying your taxes slightly less painful and bureaucratic, rather than lowering the total aggregate amount you actually pay.
Oh, I see.
For example, they addressed the tax collected at source, or TCS. The TCS on money sent overseas for specific purposes, like paying for a child's foreign education, critical medical treatment abroad, or international travel, was reduced to 2%.
Okay, that's something.
They also introduced highly automated processes for taxpayers to obtain lower or nil TDS tax deducted at source certificates much faster. And broadly, they're preparing the bureaucratic groundwork to transition to a completely overhauled, simplified income tax act scheduled for April 2026.
I understand the administrative benefit, I do, but does a 2% drop in the tax collected on your overseas holiday really fix the fundamental problem that your urban rent just went up 20% and your salary only went up 1%?
Probably not.
It feels a bit like trying to treat a structural foundation collapse with a fresh coat of paint.
To impartially understand the government's stance, we have to look at their macroeconomic rationale. The government's perspective is that they already provided significant structural adjustments in the previous 2025 budget.
Oh, when they raised the standard deduction limits.
Right. And they expanded the tax-free income brackets under the new tax regime. From their viewpoint, providing massive tax cuts 2 years in a row would jeopardize fiscal deficit targets.
Got it.
In 2026, they are choosing to hold that fiscal ground to maintain broad economic stability. Furthermore, their strategy is to funnel money into capital expenditure, building roads, ports, railways, believing that this massive infrastructure push will eventually spur private investment and, further down the line, create the very jobs the middle class desperately needs.
But there is one major specific initiative in this budget targeted directly at the cities where all this middle-class pressure is boiling over, right? The Urban Challenge Fund.
Yes, the Urban Challenge Fund, or UCF, is perhaps the most significant urban policy shift in recent years. This is a massive, centrally sponsored scheme designed under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs.
And what's the number on that?
It officially allocates 1,000 crore rupees to support critical urban infrastructure development between the years 2025 and 2030.
100,000 crore sounds like a monumental amount of money to finally fix the potholes, the toxic air, and the failing water grids.
It is a highly significant sum of capital, but the mechanism of how that money is dispersed is what is truly crucial to understand here. The UCF represents a complete paradigm shift in urban governance.
How so?
It is actively moving away from traditional grant-based financing, where the central government just writes a check to a city, toward a market-linked, reform-driven approach.
How does that mechanism actually work in practice for a city like Bengaluru or Mumbai?
It means the central government will now only commit to covering a maximum of 25% of any given infrastructure project's cost.
Only 25%.
As a strict prerequisite to unlocking those central funds, the cities themselves must prove their financial discipline by raising a minimum of 50% of the project cost directly from the open market.
Wait, like issuing bonds?
Exactly. They have to issue municipal bonds, secure commercial bank loans, or structure complex public-private partnerships. The remaining 25% of the funding is expected to be contributed by the respective state governments.
So the cities have to act like profitable corporations. They have to prove to private investors that they are financially viable to get the infrastructure help they desperately need.
Yes.
But let's go back to the individual taxpayer. If the middle class is suffering this much, if inflation is 9% and real wages are negative, why isn't there massive, overwhelming political pressure forcing the government to change the tax brackets or provide direct, immediate relief?
To understand that dynamic, we must look at the demographic data objectively and impartially without taking any political sides. The reality of policymaking in a massive democracy like India is ultimately a matter of pure, inescapable math.
What's the math?
According to the data highlighted in Breakpoint, out of an eligible voting population of approximately 970 million citizens in India, there are only about 40 million individuals who actually file and pay income tax.
40 million out of nearly a billion voters.
Mathematically, the formal, salaried, tax-paying middle class is a politically marginal demographic. Any ruling political party, regardless of its ideological leaning left, right, or center, must rationally prioritize the urgent needs of the vast, overwhelming majority to secure electoral victory and maintain stability.
That makes logical sense.
In a developing nation, this almost always means focusing limited state resources on large-scale welfare, food security, and subsidy programs designed for the lower-income demographic, who form the absolute bedrock of the voting base.
Because that is simply where the Democratic mandate comes from.
Exactly. And conversely, modern political campaigns and state building require massive, sustained funding, which necessitates policies that are generally favorable to the corporate sector and the elite classes who possess the capacity to provide that capital investment.
So where does that leave the salaried professional?
The middle class finds itself structurally trapped in the middle of these two immense forces. Their tax revenue is absolutely vital to keeping the machinery of the state running. They provide the capital, but their specific voting bloc is simply not large enough to successfully demand systemic, structural relief tailored to their specific economic anxieties.
They fold the system, but they don't have the sheer demographic numbers to steer the ship. Which brings us full circle to why that 20 lakh salary feels so isolating.
We have covered immense, highly complex ground today.
We really have. We started by completely dismantling the myth of the 20 lakh salary, breaking down how a 1% real wage growth battling against a 9% effective inflation rate on core essentials has essentially put the salaried professional on a treadmill that is actively accelerating backward.
We look deeply into how modern cities are functioning as wealth extraction machines through a fundamentally broken real estate market.
Right, where developers can no longer afford to build mid-segment housing, forcing desperate buyers into panic-driven FOMO.
We examined the terrifying, systemic rise in unproductive household debt, revealing a reality where young families are sacrificing 40% of their income just to service the high-interest loans they require simply to survive.
And we explored how this micro-level individual debt crisis is directly stalling the macro-level consumption engine that drove India's broader economic growth for over 3 decades.
We explored the deeply emotional cultural fallout, the shrinking family sizes dictated by Excel sheets, the death of the single-income household, the crushing sandwich pressure of elderly care, and the sudden luxury of domestic help.
And finally, we objectively analyzed a union budget that offers administrative compliance tweaks rather than structural rescue, leaving the salaried class politically stranded by the sheer mathematics of democracy.
If you are listening to this and feeling the pinch, if you are stressed about your bank balance on the 28th of the month despite working harder and longer than you ever have in your life, it is crucial to internalize this one fact.
Which is,
this is not a personal failure of budgeting. You are not failing the system. The macroeconomic structure is actively shifting underneath your feet.
you are attempting to navigate a massive historical economic transition that is currently squeezing the salaried class globally, but is hitting the Indian professional with particular ferocity right now. It is a mathematical, structural reality, absolutely not a moral failing on your part.
Understanding the precise mechanics of this squeeze, the inflation weighting, the debt cycles, the urban economics, is the necessary first step toward navigating it rationally rather than reacting to it emotionally.
And we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you close this out. If the traditional, universally accepted milestones of success, owning a sprawling permanent home in the city, having multiple children without financial terror, keeping a car, seamlessly supporting an extended family, if those physical things become mathematically impossible for the vast majority of the population to achieve, how will the next generation fundamentally redefine what a successful, happy life actually looks like? Will they eventually abandon the traditional concept of asset ownership entirely, opting instead for a subscription-based, highly nomadic lifestyle where temporary experiences permanently replace physical assets? Keep questioning the complex world around you, and keep questioning the